Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to add my voice to this very important discourse in this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, it is a very sad and solemn occasion for our country. I believe every St. Lucian, at home and abroad, is preoccupied with the whole issue of COVID-19 and its impact on the economic and social fabric of our country. Mr. Speaker, it is really sad that we have experienced many deaths in our country. And as sensitive individuals, as those with empathy, I would like to really express my heartfelt sympathy to the families who have lost their loved ones to COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, we experienced significant drift during the course of the debate. And member after member opposite have just been attacking members opposite for asking relevant questions and for debating exactly what is presented before this honorable House. And that is, be it resolved that Parliament approves the declaration of a state of emergency that was published in the Gazette on the 3rd day of February 2021 as statutory instrument number 27 of 2021, containing a declaration that a public emergency has arisen as a result of the occurrence of 2019 nCoV, an infectious disease commonly known as COVID-19, for a further period of 90 days commencing from the 11th day of February 2021 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021. Mr. Speaker, we readily appreciate why we are here in this Parliament to debate this particular motion. We know what the Constitution makes provisions for, and nobody has any difficulty making that nexus between approving a state of emergency because of that curfew. I believe the nexus we want members opposite to make is, why is it absolutely necessary in the context of fighting COVID that you have a curfew from 7 to 5? It is not too much to ask in terms of what is going to be implemented during that 90-day period that will constitute an architecture, a framework for combating COVID-19. Logical questions would come to mind. The Prime Minister and member for Miku South indicated in his preamble that the rationale is to restrict personal movement. Generally, the nights are made for sleeping. Most people in St. Lucia would sleep at night. And therefore, by virtue of that natural dynamic, there would be a restriction to the movement of people. During the day, that's when people move about. So people are going to ask themselves those questions as to why you are going to restrict movement during a time where movement generally is restricted. Is the opposition rude and out of place to ask this fundamental question? What is in that question for the member for Kasri Southeast, for example, to talk about the track record of the Labour Party, to talk about the lack of leadership on this side, Mr. Speaker? What does that have to do with the state of emergency? Now, I just find it more than proper. He asked about report card. And every time he asks that question, I believe that we can answer easily. In 2006, when they took over the levers of power, that was the report card of the Labour Party. An economy that had grown by over 5.4%. Unemployment was down 13.6%, the lowest in 15 years. Wealth was more evenly distributed in the country, and indigence had been reduced significantly. Between 2011, in fact, when we came in 2011, the economy was in a mess. We had a fiscal deficit of almost 10%. Wasco was in a mess. Nobody wanted to borrow Wasco any money. Our entire infrastructure had gone back to zero. And then you, on this side, want to criticize the Labour Party about track record. Between 2011 and 2016, we were able to reduce the deficit. We were able to create employment for thousands of St. Lucians through various programs like NICE and SMILES. Mr. Speaker, then report card, then the member for Choiseul, and also the member for Castle South East talk about sinking fund. Talk about sinking fund. If I were in their place, I wouldn't talk about sinking fund. Sinking fund. Mr. Speaker, on page 258 of the estimates of revenue and expenditure, head 44, line 2340, acquisition of sinking fund investment. There was an expenditure of $11,999,999.
Indicate the year, please.
This year, Mr. Speaker, 2021, 2022, there was an expenditure, like I said, of almost 12 million for the fiscal year. Listen, I am quoting from this year's estimates of revenue and expenditure. No, 2020 to 2021. My apologies. So there was expenditure of almost 12 million for the fiscal period 2018-2019, and another 12 million were estimated to have been spent in 2019-2020. How many millions were utilized in relocating Boseju and the garbage dump to facilitate T.O.A.King? You know what that could do in terms of providing laptops and tablets and support for the most vulnerable during this period? You know what could be provided for them, Mr. Speaker? And then members opposite would condemn us and talk about how great they are in responding to the most vulnerable. At this time, many barbershops are closed. They have their loans. They have to pay the bank. We have to be sensitive to those things, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have to be sensitive when we come and ask. We need to fight COVID-19 within the framework of our integrated whole. But you do not ask us for support. And then in the very support, I did not speak at the time they were launching all their attacks. They even reached as far as talking about probability in terms of spread, match, and spread. Mr. Speaker, on that same day of the march, in a very close setting, they had the youth conference in a closed environment. In a closed, well, whatever date, but you all had it. You all had it. You all claim that there was an increase in COVID-19 after our march. And so you all are so great in responding to COVID-19 that instead of tightening the protocols, you loosen it in December around Christmas time, knowing full well there's going to be contact amongst family members and friends. Did you tighten the protocol for Christmas last year? You tighten it? Anyway, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I read this resolution, I began to reflect on our past debates on COVID-19 in this honorable house and of the propaganda perpetuated both in and outside of this house by members on opposite about the exemplary performance of the government in handling and managing COVID-19. The leader of the opposition The honorable member for Castres East was castigated for suggesting that St. Lucia was the worst prepared for managing the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead, Mr. Speaker, in a more recent sitting of this House, the honorable members opposite gloated in verses, with each UWP parliamentarian adding a verse to the song of bravado, that St. Lucia was the best prepared in the Caribbean and possibly one of the best in the world for managing the pandemic. This was followed, Mr. Speaker, by the chorus of the band leader, who sang the chorus, "Who can argue with success?" The various verses sung by the band members and the chorus sung by the band leader, the member for Miku South, "Who can argue with success," was based on performance metrics that in their view supported the claim and the asinine composition that we were the best. At the time, St. Lucia's performance on COVID-19 was based on the number of positive cases, the number of active cases, and the number of deaths. Mr. Speaker, it was even suggested that St. Lucia's stringent protocols were world-class and we were a world leader in managing this COVID-19 pandemic. As I reflect on this particular sitting and other statements made outside of this House, one statement sticks indelibly in my mind: that we have the virus under control. There were other similar statements, Mr. Speaker, and sentiments expressed by various members of the cabinet. I also reflect on the prophetic statement made by the leader of the opposition, the honorable member for Castres East, who was castigated at the time for saying that we were the worst prepared for dealing with this pandemic. His statement, Mr. Speaker, was based on a number of factors, including, notably, Mr. Speaker, his knowledge of the state of the health sector in St. Lucia and this government's neglect and deliberate procrastination in commissioning the OKEU hospital and completing the St. Jude's hospital. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member for Miku South, in a meeting that they had a video circulating around, said that he had deliberately delayed the completion of the OKEU hospital because he wanted a private company, namely Health City Cayman Island, to manage the hospital. The project to complete the St. Jude's hospital can best be described as a fiasco, Mr. Speaker. Now there is a mad frenzy to complete the structure. Like you swear, Mr. Speaker, they were running a 100 meters race. The member for Miku South left his home very early last Friday to witness the installation of the cladding, as if the hospital had reached the 18-meter mark and there was a mad dash to complete the remaining 20 meters. We know, Mr. Speaker, that this is not so. This hospital is far from complete. The veneer of completion given by the installation of yellow cladding is another ploy to try to befog the some common sense of the people of this country. The government is famous for misleading the people, as they did with the mysterious $6.80 tax on fuel and the elimination of VAT. We know, Mr. Speaker, containing and managing the COVID-19 pandemic, just like completing St. Jude's, is not a 100-meter dash. In the case of St. Jude's, we had made major strides in completing the hospital, Mr. Speaker. But this government decided to go back to the starting line and run the race all over again. Up to now, they have not given us the technical reasons for embarking on this particular course of action. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we are still awaiting the presentation to this House of the ridiculously priced $1 million technical audit by this government on the St. Jude Hospital project. We also are aware, Mr. Speaker, of forensic audits conducted by this government with expenditures of hundreds of thousands of dollars on this audit. So if the technical audit recommended the completion of the existing structures, as the copy we have has shown, one can only conclude, Mr. Speaker, that the erection of this structure by this government is based on politics. In the case of managing the COVID-19 pandemic, the government should have been responsible enough to know that managing this virus was like running a marathon and not running a 100 meters. Mr. Speaker, it is also well known that people who run a marathon like they are running a 100-meter dash often finish last or never finish. Like a marathon, Mr. Speaker, the persistence of the virus will test the resilience of our systems, structures, and protocols. If the system, structures, and protocols are not resilient, Mr. Speaker, they will fail, and we will begin to suffer the consequences of such failure. Mr. Speaker, this is exactly what we are suffering from at this juncture in time. I ask, Mr. Speaker, what is the current state of COVID-19, and in particular the report card of this government? In particular, when we look at the performance metrics to gauge success, where do we stand today, Mr. Speaker? Based on the data I have as of Friday, February 5th, 2021, St. Lucia has recorded 1,813 positive cases with 18 deaths and 920 active cases. As a measure of comparison, Barbados has recorded 1,641 cases with 15 deaths and 352 active cases. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has recorded 1,067 cases with 3 deaths and 726 active cases. Antigua and Barbuda has recorded 268 cases with 7 deaths and 80 active cases. Grenada, 148 cases with 1 death and 1 active case. And St. Kitts and Nevis, Mr. Speaker, has recorded 39 cases with 0 deaths and 3 active cases. If I had to use a per capita comparison, as I see the member for Miku South is fond of using these days, we will see St. Lucia is way ahead of all the OECS neighbors and indeed ahead of Barbados. So you're talking about per capita, I gave it to you. And you can go and do your own research. Go and do your own research. The latest data, Mr. Speaker, as of February 7, 2021 shows that we now have 214 new cases, bringing the total number of cases to 2,207 positive cases, a staggering 1,091 active cases, and sadly, an additional death, bringing the total number of deaths to 19. And that was as of February 7, 2021. That's 2 days ago. Based on the report coming from the Ministry of Health, this sample was for the period January 27 to January 29, 2021. Mr. Speaker, we are now reporting on cases over 2 weeks ago. This is serious, Mr. Speaker. And we really need to know the extent of the backlog because the numbers are misleading. I wish to state, Mr. Speaker, that the government has lost control of the pandemic and we are now in a very serious crisis. Increasingly, many government offices have been closed because public officers have been and are continuing to be infected. The latest offices to be closed are those in the Finance Administrative Center, which has been closed, was closed Friday for 8th and 9th for deep cleaning. That's public information. Mr. Speaker, the gross incompetence of this government in managing this pandemic is stark for all to see. And the beating of chests in this honorable house will not solve the problem. So they need to get off the high horse and off the campaign style of referring to the opposition and addressing this honorable house and addressing the general public and seek meaningful cooperation. When the numbers were low, the government was quick to take the praise, gloating about the protocols that were in place. Now that the numbers are sky high, the St. Lucian citizens are now the scapegoat. It is clear that if you took the praise for the perceived and specious success, which was obviously premature, as my colleagues indicated, to adjudicate at the time, you now need to take the blame and be accountable for mismanaging and controlling the spread of the COVID-19 virus. You need to own. So I ask, Mr. Speaker, who can argue with failure? Who can argue with failure? As this government has failed miserably, and the St. Lucian people, the St. Lucian public, in discharging its duty of protecting St. Lucians. I didn't see that in a movie, you know. This is live and direct in our society, Mr. Speaker. And we on this side will never celebrate what is happening in this country at this particular moment. But when we come and we ask questions that are relevant, do not try to torture us for honest opinion. 18, 20, or 22 lives lost, Mr. Speaker, either been lost by now. We do not know what the correct figure is. And more will be lost before we bring this pandemic under control. It is our view, Mr. Speaker, that one life lost is too many. And that saving lives are more important than livelihoods. Well, members on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, understood that there was a need to tighten protocols, especially as it related to second testing of visitors and to imposing a ban on British visitors when we learned about the new strain of the COVID virus. And in particular, it was much more contagious than the original strain. This government, instead of listening, went ahead boasting about the increased numbers of tourist arrivals, as my colleagues told you, particularly from the United Kingdom. But we know, Mr. Speaker, this government does not listen. And sad to say, Mr. Speaker, we had to be saved from this government's folly by the British government imposing a ban on UK visitors traveling for leisure purposes, and the US government imposing tougher restrictions on travel for their visitors and putting us at level 4. Apart from the lives lost, Mr. Speaker, and the irrefutable pain inflicted on those St. Lucians who have suffered because of COVID-19, the economic and social consequences of this government's policy on the St. Lucian public has been nothing short of catastrophic. Mr. Speaker, many small businesses which employ many St. Lucians have had to close down, and many are teetering on the edge of being closed permanently. Instead, Mr. Speaker, these livelihoods, indeed, these livelihoods did not matter to this government, who favored business as usual in this country. Moreover, many St. Lucians are on the brink of survival and need income support to provide for the basic necessities for their families. If the sinking fund was there, instead of being utilized for relocating Beauséjour and relocating Dom, we would have monies available to deal with our challenges, Mr. Speaker. Alas, Mr. Speaker, this government has chosen as a matter of policy to use the concessional funding given for COVID-19 relief, like the IMF funds, to finance the infrastructural projects, like purchasing incinerators. These were deemed more important than providing income support to struggling St. Lucians who are really suffering at this time. I know, Mr. Speaker, as I see the struggling and pain of my fellow constituents every day. Alas, Mr. Speaker, there is no money to give the thousands of struggling St. Lucians at this time, because we have used the money for all types of things. And we have refused to look at other options to provide for St. Lucians. We note the government is continuing to pursue its airport project, which I wish to state again did not go through a tender process, and which our administration had provided a superior solution by the IFC of the World Bank. This government has instead plunged our country into serious debt, into an insoluble economic and social crisis. The information reaching us, Mr. Speaker, is that the government now owes close to $100 million and is involved in crisis cash management. Information reaching me, Mr. Speaker, indicate that some people have not been paid for as long as 4 months. In fact, one of the reasons given for Lucilex downgrading is because the government owes Lucilex significant sums of money. I am also hearing that now WASCO, which our administration placed on a sound financial footing, is now in a mess, and that government owes WASCO millions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, I anxiously await the economic review and data on GDP, unemployment, and other critical economic indicators, as well as the budget estimates for the fiscal period 2021 to 2022, when we debate the budget on or before March 1st, 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic has had many other casualties, Mr. Speaker, because of this government's mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. The fishers are now placed in a financial problem because of the privatization of the fisheries complex. Windfresh has now gone belly up, and banana farmers are leaving the industry in droves. Many believe the Prime Minister when he said he had secured a market for bananas in France. So as I reflect on the past, and in particular, this government's mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic, how do we go forward, Mr. Speaker? It is clear that our health sector is bursting at the seams. The Ezra Long laboratory cannot now process the number of samples coming in for testing. Many people are still awaiting the results after being tested in excess of 1 week. The Ministry of Health can no longer engage in effective contact tracing, as they do not have the resources to do so, given the massive spike in cases. The doctors and nurses are overwhelmed at the Victoria Hospital, as the number of COVID-19 patients are at capacity. The number of deaths are rising at an alarming rate, Mr. Speaker. I'm asking God to put a hand. The government decided to open schools in January amidst the spike in the positive COVID-19 cases, and was forced to close schools after pressure was exerted by the St. Lucia Teachers Union and the Student Union and parents, as well as the general public, Mr. Speaker. Having stopped the laptop program for 4 years, the government is now attempting to save face with the inferior tablets they are now offering students. Even then, the numbers being offered are woefully inadequate, and students continue to suffer as a result of the failure of this government in stopping the laptop program. Mr. Speaker, right now, the Banslagwa School, there are students at the Banslagwa School in my constituency that have not received any tablets or computers from the ministry, and there are parents that are struggling with many children in the home. I remember one with a single tablet. You have a child at the comprehensive school, you have one at the Banslagwas and another one. And when the first one went to school with the tablet, by the time the other one came to use it, the teacher was just saying goodbye at the end of the day. So you know what? You know what? I'm assisting my constituents tremendously, you know. But mahabuki bava, makavi ni ale television, epi tout bagay mo bay, mweni a press release. I don't do that. I don't do that. When I give hampers to poor people, I do not put their faces on social media for people to see they're receiving something. I don't do that. These are things you must do, because that has been part of my nature. For decades, I have been doing so. It is clear that this government does not have a clue as to how to manage the crisis that we are in right now. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, we are losing both lives and livelihoods at a rapid rate. It is also clear, Mr. Speaker, that the government has placed the people of St. Lucia in a very difficult situation and now is requesting a state of emergency for an additional 3 months to manage the pandemic. The government has, however, chosen to leave our borders open for British and US visitors. We are now ranked at level 4 by the CDC in the US, which means that the US government is telling its citizens to avoid all travel to St. Lucia. The UK government has banned its citizens from traveling. Canada has also banned travel to the Caribbean. But, Mr. Speaker, we are inviting those same citizens all over to come to our country simply because we have squandered our money on infrastructural projects and projects that are priority to the government and not necessarily a priority to the people of this country that are suffering. We must, Mr. Speaker, ensure that our citizens remain safe and that lives are protected. That must be our first priority, Mr. Speaker. In that regard, we need to tighten our protocols as it relates to travel. We are now hearing about the South African variant. The other day I heard about the Brazilian variant, which of course experts for the South African variant have indicated it spreads more rapidly and is more contagious. Of greater concern, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that preliminary studies suggest that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine offers limited protection against mild disease from the South African variant. Mr. Speaker, the vaccine that we are going to be receiving is the Oxford AstraZeneca. Hence, Mr. Speaker, we have to be extremely careful that the South African variant, the South African strain of the virus, should not enter our shores, if it has not already done so, Mr. Speaker. I am beginning to wonder, Mr. Speaker, with all those variations in virus, that if we have a St. Lucian variant, given the massive increases in St. Lucia, you can never tell. This virus is troublesome. It mutates. It's a challenge for all of us. And the government cannot come to the parliament and believe by attacking the opposition and trying to make us look bad, that they are the ones working and we are not working. When we had cases in Library, Mr. Speaker, when I spoke to the CMO and other professionals, what did we do? We went into a community conversation. You never heard me on news criticizing the government. I was busy telling the people of the constituency within our group that we should observe the protocol at all times. And like one member opposite said, we're not doing it for the member for Mico South. We are doing it for ourselves. We are doing it to protect our lives, the lives of our loved ones, the lives of our constituents, the lives of St. Lucians, and the lives of anybody who visit St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the government does not have a comprehensive policy in place that will protect St. Lucians, and simply imposing a state of emergency without stronger and stricter protocols for travel will fail. Now, Mr. Speaker, I just want to end on one specific note. I sat in this chamber, and persons who do not have a clue as to how to manage a country or how to assess the performance of an economy is attacking the member for Cassis East. I have always refrained from attacking people personally in this honorable house and outside of this honorable house. Trying to belittle the leader of the opposition, trying to ridicule a man who has performed both as a politician and a minister of government. And that is how I want to end. Mr. Speaker, a number of persons have not taken time to really analyze the duties of an MP. Come here to either make laws, amend laws, debate the important issues of the day, to check and approve government spending, the budget, the taxes, and of course to check and challenge the work of the government. The member for Cassis East is one of the parliamentarians who's consistent in this honorable house of doing all of the above. He represents his constituents and constituency with great skill. And it is disrespectful for people to play the politics and to attack him, Mr. Speaker. Whatever ministry he held, he served with distinction. Whether in the Ministry of Commerce, putting industrial policy in place, or an export strategy, whether in tourism, by attracting over $1 billion worth of investment in the tourism industry, and I want to see the person that come as the first runner-up to him, whether as Minister for Infrastructure, roads in all constituencies, including his, you'll see evidence of his work. And he managed limited resources, and he was able to do all of that without imposing $1.50 on a gallon of gas. An additional $1.50 like they did when they came in to office. COVID-19 has presented challenges that we need prudence in the management of the resources of this country. And the member for Kaswis East has demonstrated, beyond a shadow of a doubt, his competence in this regard. Whatever social programs the government he belonged to put in place benefited his constituents. Whether it was the NICE program, whether it was STEP, whether it was SMILE, whether it was the distress fund that you all removed. And he presided over cabinet with great skill, experience, and knowledge. He was chosen to lead the party on the basis of the fact that he is a politician. Just like the captain of a football team or a cricket team is a footballer or a cricketer, a politician must always lead a political party. Not people who claim that they are not politicians and they come in to run country as a business. That cannot work. We saw it in America, and we've seen this experiment backfiring right here. Let us be respectful. Let us agree for us to fight COVID-19 together so that we can minimize the number of deaths, Mr. Speaker, and we can return our country to normalcy. Because like the member for Miku South rightly said in his opening statement, even with the vaccine, we will still grapple with COVID-19 for many years. In fact, I just listened to CNN and a doctor was explaining that even though you are vaccinated, that doesn't mean you will not get COVID. It will just be mild and minimize the possibility of death. So let us stop this attacking of the opposition and talk about how you all can manage and we cannot manage. We're putting all of you together to the power of infinity. You all cannot be equivalent to one of the soldiers on this side of the house. Yes, you all cannot do that. So, whilst we are unequally yoked, we are willing to work with any organization and with the government. But we are not going to be a mere appendage to anything. We must be an integral part of a process. So, I conclude, Mr. Speaker, by indicating that the member for Miku South, in summing up, can simply indicate how the 90-day period of the SOE will fit into the overall strategy. I am not at variance with any action that is in the best interest of St. Lucians and St. Lucia to contain this virus. I will not be at variance with it. So I think, in summing up, the Prime Minister should stay away from bashing members on this side and speak to how he's going to deal with everything at his disposal to give the St. Lucian public the confidence that the government is on the right track, and of course to get the support of the public to observe the protocol. In every society you will get people that do not want to comply. But again, I say to St. Lucians, please observe the protocol. Please cooperate with the authorities in eliminating COVID-19 from our shores. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.